Hey, everybody, welcome back to another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show, where we make it our business to help you take dominion over your money and your life. And we're going to do that today with this episode. But first, we wanted to just say thanks. Thanks for tuning into the show. You could be listening and watching a whole bunch of other things, but the fact that you're here with us today, we want you to know that we're grateful. And we hope that you're ready to receive some fantastic information that won't just help you, but your little ones as well. Again, our goal is to help you take dominion. And yes, that begins with you, but it doesn't end with you. We want you and your family to win. And that's why we're doing this particular episode with a very special guest waiting in the wings to help us understand some things that we definitely need to understand. We are honored to have Dr. Caroline Leaf with us on this particular episode. She's got a brand new book that I can't wait for you to hear more about. She's going to give us some wisdom on how to make sure that our kids are whole and that we're doing our part to give them a solid foundation to build upon. So get your pen and paper ready or your notes app open, because I promise you, Dr. Leaf is going to share some jewels that you are going to want to remember. So let's go get Dr. Caroline so that we can learn and glean from her wisdom and apply it to our lives. Hey, Dr. Caroline, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Hi, thank you. So nice to be with you today. How are you doing?
We're glad to have you. I mean, we've been fans of your work for a very long time. You've been helping people all around the world when it comes to mental health and how to improve and get a better quality of life in this particular area. And now you're back because you don't want to just help us. You've been helping us for a long time, Dr. Leaf. Now you want to help our kids, which I think is fantastic. But before we get into what your new work is all about, some people maybe being introduced to you for the very first time right here and right now. So for them, would you mind saying hello and then just kind of letting them know what you're all about?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show, and it's great to be here with you. And I'm so pleased that I'm so pleased that you've enjoyed some of the work that I've done. And I'm a psychoneurobiologist and a communication pathologist and neuroscientist. And basically, with that big mouthful, means that I study the mind-brain-body connection. I've been in the field for 40 years now, nearly 40 years. I practice clinically for 25, still do a lot of research ongoing. I'm ongoing research. I'm constantly trying to understand more about how the mind works and the brain works and thoughts and memories, and understand how we can manage our mental health and build our mental health and help our kids. A lot of the work I did was with children as well. I've worked with all age groups, and I have 4 of my own children that are adults. And it's basically you can teach someone as young as 2 and younger even, but as young as 2, to manage their mental health. And in this day and age where there's such a crisis, that's so important. I know we're going to get into that. So that's kind of a big summary of what I do now. I don't practice anymore. I write books, I do research, I do talks all over the world, and try and really make mental health accessible and affordable for everyone.
Why should everyone value, pay attention, learn about their mental health?
Well, that's a fantastic, good first starting question. If you think about it, the fact that we can have this conversation means that we're alive. We're alive. We're functioning. I can process what you're asking me. You can process my answers. People are interacting. If we were dead, we couldn't do this. So, the difference between being alive and being dead is your mind, and your mind drives your mental health, not your brain. So your brain is just the tool that your mind uses in order for you to be able to show up as a human. And your mind doesn't just use your brain, it uses your body as well. So your mind is the driving force. It's your life force. It's your ability to think, feel, and choose and experience everything, respond, make decisions, make good decisions, make bad decisions, make money decisions, make everything about you that you can do because you're alive is because of your mind. Messy mind, messy brain, messy body, messy life. So what we need is to learn to understand how to manage our minds, which begins with understanding more details about our mind. And when we talk about mind, obviously we're talking about things like memory and thoughts and emotions and things like depression and anxiety and mental health and mental, all these challenges that we can have as humans, just being alive and going through all the things that we go through, which are inevitable in life. So mental health, understanding our mental health begins with understanding our mind, and it's an absolute priority, because without your mind, you're dead. So we should be managing the thing that actually drives our mental health, which is our mind.
I want to, I mean, you've written a lot of fantastic books. One of the ones that you're known for quite a bit is How to Clean Up Your Mental Mess. And now you've come back and you've given us how to help your kids clean up their mental mess. What's a mental mess?
Well, that's something that is very common to every human. If you're alive and living, which you are, your mind's working, and your mind working will make a mess. It's okay to be a mess. Messiness is part of being human. We don't know what's coming up in the next moment. So it kind of gets messy. I mean, even to a certain extent, a conversation like this would be a certain extent of messiness, because you're not exactly 100% sure of my answers, and I'm not 100% sure of your questions. We know we're going in a direction. And that kind of messiness is very, very normal. It's kind of like experimental. We are testing out things, we going through the day, we have relationships, everything's kind of messy. But what we have to do is manage those messes. So let's say, for example, we have an argument with someone, or I'll give you some really simple example. Like, the wires were crossed and I jumped onto this interview late because there was some communication issue. Now, that was a mess, but it wasn't a mess that was a huge problem, because we resolved the mess and we tidied it up. Let's talk about something that maybe you have an argument with your wife or your husband or your best friend or your work colleague or your children or something like that. And that's messy. And let's say that you don't resolve that, it gets more messy. And if you still don't resolve it, it gets more and more messy. And a messy relationship starts impacting how you perceive yourself and perceive that person, and creates tension. Now, that's a mess that's unmanaged. A mess that is a mess that's managed. Like, if you then decide, okay, I'm going to talk to this person, I'm going to discuss these issues, we're going to work out a solution, we're going to resolve. That's managing the mental mess. So messiness is part of the day to day, just living, but it's also being able to stand back and say, okay, this is messy, this is a little mess, this is not such a big issue, it's just part of the normal day to day. But this mess is is actually a bit of a problem, because it's a relationship issue. Or this mess is actually a pattern in my life that is affecting how I'm functioning, and is making me feel quite depressed and anxious, and it's in my functionality is not working so well. So that messiness definitely needs to be prioritized and given dedicated, deliberate intention, versus the little messes that I can kind of just fix up as I'm going along. Does that make sense? Is the biggest thing is, I always tell people it's okay to be a mess. What's not okay is if we don't manage our mess, because not managing our messes then leads to more mess, which then inevitably can go down a rabbit hole of mental health challenges.
Now, this particular book, I heard you say that, this is like going to be the first of a few when you're targeting children, because in this particular book, you are focused in on ages 3 to 10 years old. And so we're talking about mental mess. We're talking about kids ages 3 to 10. For the parent that's listening and watching, there it is, how to help your child clean up their mental mess. How, like, for some people, they may be like, but they ain't got no responsibilities. I'm the one doing all this and handling all that. All they do is play their games and go to, like, there may be some preconceived notions as to the amount or the severity of mental mess that our 3 to 10 year olds could possibly be dealing with. Can you help us understand that aspect and overcome that maybe mental hurdle right out the gate?
That's an excellent question. Every person, we can never be an expert on anyone else's experience except our own, even your children. So what may seem for you like, that's like they've got such a, it's easy. They just have to go to school and whatever. But at school, maybe they're going to a new grade. Like, it's holidays now, they're going to be going to a new grade in August or September, depending where you live. That's very scary for a child. And that's, you've got to make new friends, there's new teachers, there's new things to learn, there's new rules. That is quite scary for a child. And that in itself can be quite messy in their minds. Let's say now that school started and they're at school and there's a new kid in the block, and that child's a bully, and that child is happens to pick on you because maybe you are just shorter than the others, or just something. They just decide that you are the one, and they get a gang together and they start bullying you. And so school becomes challenging. And the way that child is showing up being a bully, obviously that's not who that child is, but there's a reason why that child's bullying. But still, your child's now the one who's experiencing that, and is the victim of that bullying, and so on. And so now your child comes home from school and doesn't quite maybe know how to express this, because maybe they're only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. They're young. They're not, maybe 6-year-old can start, 5-year-old, they can start sort of telling you more, but they understand more than they can say. But their behaviors change. So they come home and they start saying, I don't want to go to school, or maybe they don't eat properly, or they're having sleeping problems, or they're having nightmares, or they're fighting with their siblings more, or they're just like being more difficult. And you think, but why are they being so difficult? They just, and then you maybe start saying things like you're being so naughty or whatever, and things that we, or you can't behave like this. We start getting angry with them because their behaviors have changed. Now that for them is a big experience, and it's the experience that they don't know how to process and maybe talk about and explain is coming out in their behaviors. So instead of looking and thinking, gosh, they don't have anything to worry about, that's huge for them. On a scale of 1 to 10, that's like at a number 10, because at a child who's at school, the relationships, those social relationships with their friends, and to be accepted by their friends, is absolutely vitally important. So if they're not being accepted, that's huge in their life. So it may not seem like a huge thing for us. Oh, they're little, they're at school, they'll get over it, it'll be fine. That's not validating what they're going through, because we're not an expert on their experience. So that is hard for that child. Maybe they got excluded from, there was a one-off incident, they got excluded from some game or something that really upset them. So these are different scales. Maybe it's really bad. Maybe there's an abusive teacher and there's something going on, or there's some, something severe that they don't know how to talk about. So things do happen on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being maybe just someone, stole their lunch or something like that, or picked on them once. It was just a sort of one-off thing, or said something that they didn't like, whatever. And it's just a one-off thing. To 8, 9, and 10, where there's a consistent type of abuse happening, where there's a sort of trauma that's starting to be a problem. All of those are life experiences that we need to be aware of as parents, that will show up in their behaviors. It'll show up in 4 areas. It'll show up in the emotions, so how they're feeling, the emotions that they're showing, and their behaviors, their bodily, how they're talking about their body, like my tummy's sore. You talk about school and they get a headache, they whatever. And then the other areas, their perspective, how they're looking at life. So they may be saying, I'm very withdrawn. They may be saying, I'm so sad, or crying a lot. So this saying I'm sad would be a emotion. Saying crying maybe a lot, or not wanting to go to school would be a behavior. To saying they've got a sore tummy when you talk about school, or getting ready in the morning to go to school, and then it would be bodily sensation. And then the 4th one is perspective. I hate school, I don't want to go back to school, that kind of thing. These are behaviors that are affecting their mind, which is affecting their mental health. And if they don't know how to have the tools to talk about that, they get bigger and bigger, and it tips like a scale will tip in the wrong direction. So mental health is, from very young, is an issue. 2 siblings, you have 2-year-olds maybe in a house, or twins, or a bigger 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, or a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're having a fight, and the one is able to verbalize more than the other one's quieter. These are all life issues. So everyone from little is being challenged in their mind to deal with stuff. Does that answer your question? Or?
Imagine a life where your money isn't strangled by mortgage payments. Imagine what you could do when you don't have to send them money that you work so hard for. Come get simple, powerful, and real solutions to eliminating monthly mortgage payments forever. America's #1 money couple presents Crush My Mortgage. In this exclusive course, you will be equipped with strategies to help you move faster toward the promised land of owning your house free and clear. Learn strategies to help you in the areas of payment acceleration, extra income generation, and wealth creation, all to help you crush your mortgage. Visit crushmymortgage.com and get started today. Join us on the path to power, freedom, and legacy. That's crushmymortgage.com.
Absolutely. And it leads to the next question because, you said a couple times they may be experiencing things that they don't know how to necessarily verbalize or communicate. And you just gave us some different signs that we could look for as within their behaviors if they're not able to verbally communicate that something's gone awry with them. How do we then? Let's say we notice a sign like you just gave us. Well, they're always trying to get out of school, or they say something negative, or there's some type of negative body language when it comes to school. As an example, if they're not real good at communicating exactly what's been going on or why they're acting that way about school, how do we, as the parent, approach that conversation, get them to open up? What are some tips you can get us to help navigate the journey once we notice the sign?
Absolutely. So the noticing of the sign is extremely important, and the second the once you've noticed is to look at your own perspective. How are you looking at that situation? Are you seeing your child as being difficult, or being naughty, or a behavior problem? Are you worried about, you could ask yourself the question, start with yourself and just think, just gather awareness of your own emotional reaction to the child. It's very important. Even if you do this in just a few minutes, just, okay, my child's showing up in this way. Let me see, how am I feeling about this? How am I feeling that in my body? Maybe my shoulders are more tense because I'm seeing that there's something going on here. I'm seeing something's not right, and I'm worried. My shoulders are tense as I'm thinking about this. I'm concerned that I don't want to maybe get snappy and reactive in that's behaviors, and my perspective. This is like becoming a bit of an issue. It's like hard to deal with this. It's going on for a long time, whatever. So you quickly just acknowledge, and then you reflect on, why could this be happening? I wonder what's actually going on. So in other words, you do a bit of work with yourself, and I'm going to go through these more steps involved that you go through, and it's called a neurocycle. The neurocycle is a system that I've developed where we can, as a human, stand back and observe how we are showing up, whether it is the parent responding to a child, and then once we have worked that out, we can then help the child process through. You can use the neurocycle to check yourself and to help yourself to help your child. Then you can use the neurocycle to help your child help themselves. And you can also use the neurocycle to help yourself with other issues. It doesn't necessarily have to be your child. The neurocycle is how you systematically drive, or let your wise mind, which we all have, manage your messy mind. So it's the ability we have to stand back and observe how we're showing up, which is not who we are if it's negative, because we aren't. People are pretty much wired for love, and we're wired for survival. So if we're showing up in a way that's impacting our functioning and hurting us in some way, like a child who's not wanting to eat and who's withdrawing and who's having nightmares, this is not good stuff for the child. So if you're showing up in that way, that's not who you are. Those are signals of something going on. So we need to pay attention, but we need to get ourselves right first. As a parent, it's vital that we get ourselves in that space so that we don't maybe get too disciplinarian or too reactive or too emotional, or kind of say the wrong thing. And we're going to say the wrong thing, but then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say the wrong thing. The apologies are very important. So that's where it would start, with you getting yourself under control. We can talk more about the neurocycle in a moment. Then when you feel like you've got yourself, even you can do this in 30 seconds, you can do it in a minute, in 2 minutes. That's when you then want to give a child the tools to be able to express himself. So let's say it's a 2 or 3 year old. Obviously, don't have the same verbal skills to be able to say, "I was bullied at school today and I'm sad." That's going to be hard for them to say that. But what you want to do is recognize and see that they're not functioning quite right, and you could take a toy. So I've created a character called Brainy, and this is the little toy of the Brainy, and that's also available with the book. And Brainy is the superhero who walks your mental health journey. Children respond very well to having a point of contact, like a toy, like an image. There's this cartoon image. Brainy appears in the book, throughout the book. So the whole neurocycle, which is a 5-step process for helping your messy wise mind manage your messy mind, and fix your brain and fix your mental health and that kind of thing. It's how you do that. It's the actual 5 steps. The little Brainy character, I use the little Brainy character to help explain this to you and to your children. So if a child comes home and they're 2 or 3 years of age, and you've got this toolbox, the little child can literally go pick up. This could be maybe in an area in your house. Maybe you have a special area where when we feel sad, we go to that area, and there's maybe a little chair with a toy box with some toys, and maybe Brainy's there and the book is there. So you've created a specific point of contact for the child. Like in a kitchen, you eat and cook. I mean, you cook, and in a bathroom, you clean your teeth. You don't clean your teeth in the garden. You clean your teeth in the bathroom. You teach the child that when I've got something that's worrying me, I go to that space in the house, even if it's a couch, a sofa, whatever, and I can pick up Brainy, or I can pick up a toy, I can pick up the book. So now I'm giving the child a point of contact where the child's saying, I need help. And if I need someone, I need to talk. That they don't know how to say that, or is I need help, I need talk. And adults will say that, or an older child might say that, and even an older child will battle. But if you create these safe spaces, then you're creating an environment where they can go in. So that's very important, to start with yourself, then create a space where no matter what you say there, you're not going to get disciplined, you're not going to get shouted at, it's safe, you're not going to get judged. Everything you say is important to me. I know who you are as my child. You're amazing. I love you. I know that if you being difficult or something, if you're throwing your toys around, or you're just being difficult, or not, whatever's, I know there's something going on. So that's the messaging that you want to give them. And if it's a designated space, it just makes it so much easier. So then you would go to that area, and then you would start the process of, you'd go, let's go sit down. And if it's a 2-year-old, you could say, oh, I see that Brainy is very sad today. And Brainy was kicking my chair on the way home from school, and Brainy didn't want to eat his lunch. Can you maybe tell me, is Brainy sad? And then you could take another toy, or if you've got 2 Brainies, and you could say, oh, Brainy, what's wrong? And you then let them join in the play, and you could act it out and pretend that you try and guess what's going on, which then is, is this right? Is this what's wrong with Brainy? Did something happen to Brainy? And then you can hand that over to the child, and the child takes over. And what you're doing is, you'll see in the book, I walk you through how to do this with a 2-year-old. I put all the developmental ages in, and I give you the questions and the kind of languaging to use. But you're essentially going to ask them, how's Brainy's? Let's say Brainy's feeling very sad. And Brainy's got a really sore tummy. So sad is emotional warning signal. You're identifying the signals. You're gathering awareness of the signals. Brainy's got a sore tummy. Now, that's a bodily sensation signal. Where does he feel sore in his tummy? So if your child keeps complaining about a sore stomach, and keeps complaining about, or a headache or something, and you notice that they tend to be sad and withdrawn, you now transferring that to the doll, the toy, whatever, or whatever other toy you use, to give them an opening, to help them to show them that you're tuning in. It's okay, I see there's something going on. So the 4 signals that you want to look out for are the emotions. So I see Brainy's sad. I see Brainy's feeling very sore. That sadness is making Brainy feel very sore in his tummy. And then you want to get behaviors. And I see Brainy does not want to eat his food, and is not sleeping very well. Is having a lot of nightmares. And I see Brainy doesn't seem to want to go to school. Is there something going on with Brainy? So they have identified the 4 signals, but I've used languaging that's something that child can relate to, and I've opened the door. And then they may still not say something. Then you can say, well, you go to step 2, which is reflection. You're asking why. Why is Brainy feeling like this? And then you start saying, Brainy feels sad because maybe his friends hurt him at school or something like that, or maybe he lost a toy, or then you're the third, that's the second step, to reflect. And the third step that you would do is you would take it, this is of the neurocycle, is to, if it's a child of 2, 3, they're not literate yet, you can say, do you want to show me what Brainy's doing? So they can then take over the dramatization, or maybe they do it they just dramatize it, or you dramatize it, or you draw pictures. You start drawing, then they draw. Say, this is what I see, so you draw the picture of what you see happening, and then they can go and scribble or draw or use a combination. The point is, step 3 is to do something that actually, when you do the acting or the visualization or the drawing, or if they are literate, writing, just putting down on a piece of paper, even if it's just words jumbled all over the place, that's the more mixed up the words are, the better, because you just want to get stuff out. You see, in the depths of our non-conscious is the experience. So what we want to do is open the door to the non-conscious to get what happened out. So by going through these steps very sequentially, you're lining up the brain to do the things properly. So things are kind of locked up. So it's like you're unlocking things to help the child process what's going on. With the adults as well, things happen and they get kind of locked up. So we've got to unlock the doors. What a lot of people do is they maybe talk about the emotion, but then they don't do anything with it. So, then it's not enough. It can actually make things worse. Or they maybe do a breathing exercise to calm down, and now the thoughts in my head, but you still haven't dealt with it. What we have to do is we have to find the experience that there's the reason behind why there are those signals. So we name the signals with little sentences, dramatizing, whatever. We reflect on them. That's the why. We somehow write them down or dramatize them or visualize them or create a little movie with words, whatever. Write words if the child's literate. And then the fourth step is, okay, let's have a look at this. Let's talk about this action, the little enactment. Let's talk about what you've drawn. Show me what that means. What does that mean that you drew a big tear coming out of Brainy's eye? And so the fourth step is to recheck. It's to look at what you've written down and what's in front of you and what the child's, or how they've dramatized. You could even in this step redo what they dramatized and say, I saw you do this, I saw Brainy do this. What does this mean? Have I done it correctly? Am I doing everything? So the recheck is to look at what's come up and try and see the pattern, the trigger, the cause. You're trying to get to the root of what's happening. What is the story? And then so that's a big step, because you've gathered all this information and kind of siloed it into this point where you're now analyzing. Now things happen to us. We can't change what's happened. If the child got bullied at school, that happened. If the child's feeling very depressed and anxious because this has been a consistent thing happening, you can't change that. That's the story, and the child's had that reaction. That's a normal reaction to be bullied, to be scared, to be fearful, to feel anxious. That's very, very normal. So we don't want to then label them and say they've got a medical illness and a chemical imbalance, which is what's currently happening. Because generally what happens is, if your child shows up with these signals, you go, either the teacher calls you in or you land up at a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and you get, they ask for the symptoms like I have actually identified, but they don't categorize them like that. It'll just be a bunch of symptoms, and then they'll give you a label. Oh, your child's got anxiety disorder, or your child's got clinical depression. And then from the label very often comes the medication. Now that's dealing with it medically. That's pathologizing or medicalizing the story. It's actually invalidating, and it takes away hope. And that's what the research shows, and what the research I've been doing. And 50 years ago, this approach to medicalizing misery and the biomedical model was introduced, and it's very dominant today. As soon as your child has any of those symptoms, run to the doctor, get your label, get your diagnosis, and that's the kind of treatment, and hopefully some therapy. But even in the therapy, if the therapy is not getting to the root cause of why the child has those signals are not caused by the brain. They're caused by what's going on in the child's life. And and as I explained, the mind puts everything in the brain, and the brain responds, because the mind is our aliveness, and our brain and body are what our mind uses. So if we're having a messy interaction with someone, that builds a very messy thought inside the brain. So just to give you an analogy, a thought looks like a tree. So if it's a happy experience, like this discussion we're having now is a very important experience. So every experience builds into the brain like a network that looks like a tree. Now that would be happy because it's green. I've got another little analogy here of a tree that's now toxic. So that would be the bullying tree. That would be the happy game with your friend tree kind of thing. But every experience, that's what you learned at school today. That's the fight with your sibling. So in other words, this is on an adult. For an adult, this is maybe the happy great time you had at work today and very great conversation we're having now, versus a fight you have with your spouse or something. So every experience builds into the brain as a network. It also builds, the brain then builds this into the body as a change in the body. That's how we'll feel the sadness in our tummy, and we'll get the migraines, and we'll get the changes in physical health. In other words, our experiences are felt in our brain and our body, and change our brain and our body. And that has to be managed. Sometimes it gets to the point where it becomes a medical problem, and you need to manage that. But that's not the cause of the issue. The cause is the story. So yes, we do need to deal with this consistent sore stomach, that if it's there long enough, damage will happen to the cells. And, maybe you need to get some kind of probiotic in place, or whatever. There's maybe there's inflammation in the body and some sort of autoimmune issue starts, or persistent migraine, whatever. All kinds of chronic stress can cause all kinds of physical illnesses. But the child battling those signals are not from a damage in the brain or chemical imbalance. Those are side effects. The issue is in the environment, and how the child is perceiving the environment, and what the child's experiencing. and how the child's experiencing that and how the child's learning how to manage that. And if one thing happens after another, if they go from bullying and maybe the parents are going through divorce and then they move schools and then there's this one bullies them and then there's that teacher that yells at them and then there's this friend that rejects them, and it's just like one thing after another, they could start getting all that pent up energy, could increase the behavioral issues, and then they get more labels and more, it can become a very vicious cycle. So what we want to do then is make sure that we get ourselves under control using the neurocycle. We also want to help our kids. And so that's why I say we gather awareness of those signals, we reflect on them, we write them down, we recheck them, and then we end the little process with what I call an active reach. And an active reach is an action that we perform that just kind of like the end of full stop at the end of a sentence. You can only do so much in a day. You can't fix everything in one neurocycle, in one day, in one session, in one time frame. It takes multiple work through. So don't expect to fix everything in your child's life. You can't fix anything in your child's life. You can only facilitate helping the child to learn how to manage themselves. They can't learn that in one instance. Sometimes something small in one neurocycle is enough to resolve an argument between two kids or a little thing. But when it comes to the patterns that are bigger, that are more established, it's going to take a bit longer to find the actual thought and to dig through that thought, to down through the branches, which is how it's showing up in their life. If you think of a tree, it's got branches, it's got a tree trunk, and it's got roots. It takes a bit of time to get to the roots. The branches are how it impacted the child, how the details of how the child's showing up. The tree trunk is like the processing. The roots are the origin story. So the actual bullying incident or the abuse incident or whatever, the siblings rivalry or whatever it may be. So it takes a bit of time. And what I've shown in my work is that when there's a pattern, you basically have developed a response that has become habituated. And habits don't break down easily. It doesn't take 21 days to build a habit. It doesn't take 21 days to break down a habit. That's a myth. But everyone thinks, 21 days for everything. 21 days is only the process where we become aware, where we start pulling up the tree, where we start getting to the root, where we start the process of deconstructing and reconstructing, healing the roots. And, okay, this has happened. What can I do? This is going on. What's my antidote? But if you don't go beyond that, if you don't stabilize a new behavior, we can easily get triggered and revert back to an old pattern. So if a child's bullied and they don't go through the whole process of getting away, of dealing with it, because there are going to be more bullies in their life. There are going to be similar situations until that child's issue for that bullying and that child who's bullying your child, that child needs help to find out why they're bullying, because they've probably been bullied by someone. So there's this whole cyclic thing. So you're never going to be in a perfect environment. So what we need to do in terms of a situation like that is obviously keep the child safe and try and resolve it and talk to the teachers and whatever. But you're going to have to teach your child how to be strong within that. And this is what the neurocycle can help you do. So it's a way of us taking the small moments and the big moments, the little things that happen and the patterns, going from the signals and then dealing with them appropriately. So if it's a little thing, you can do a quick neurocycle between the kids and you resolve the fight. If it's a big thing, if it's a consistent pattern, you're going to need to work at it daily for a few minutes each day. And I'll give you all the timing. And it's going to take about 21 days to kind of get to the point where you've got a solution. And then you're going to have to practice using that solution, that new way of thinking, for at least another 6 weeks or so. So it's just a little reminder that part's actually quite quick. It's literally, maybe you just have a little reminder on their phone if they've got a phone at that age. If not, you just give them a little piece of paper and they can put it in their pocket, or it's a little sticker on their hand. When I look at the sticker, it reminds me of that new way of thinking that I've practiced. But it's a deliberate, intentional, daily focus on, this is how I'm going to get this under control. There's a long answer there. I don't know if you want me to unpack anything in specifically.
No, that was a fantastic answer, and it kind of continues to lead me forward in my thinking, because I'm wondering, how do we normalize mental health for ourselves and for our kids? Because one of the things you talk about in your book is the importance of laying a firm foundation when it comes to mental health. And I remember last year, my mother-in-law passed away, and she was a big part of our kids' lives. They lived 10 minutes down the road, and at that time they were 12, 10, and 8. And um, when the school asked, did they want to sit down with the social worker and maybe, talk things through. None of them wanted to do it because I think that already, even at their young age, they have this negative perception about what happens when you go see a social worker, just as an example, because, for whatever, external influences they have, like, no, I don't want to be labeled as that or associated with that. And so I'm wondering, how do we normalize the mental health discussion and make it so that it's not this off-putting thing, but that it could be beneficial in your journey?
Such a great and such an important question. Well, you said something so relevant there. You said that the kids are almost scared to go talk about their grief because they're going to be labeled. So already our children are telling us something that we need to listen to. That labeling makes them feel worse about themselves. So the whole move that we've had for the past 40 years, for 40, 50 years, has been one of almost literally medicalizing misery, pathologizing childhood, making the the depression and sadness that you would feel from losing a grandparent that you love and adore and who's part of your life, and the grieving that will make you depressed. It will affect your behaviors. It will affect, and that's a very, very normal response. But what we've done, not we, I don't do that, but what's been done with the system, which the kids are picking up on. I'm so glad that you said what you said there. They didn't want to go to talk because they're going to be labeled there's something wrong with them. They don't want to be, when you're grieving, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't need a label. You don't need to be told you have a mental illness because you feel depressed because your grandmother died. You need to be validated in that grief is a normal process. You're grieving, and everyone grieves differently, and there's no time frame. And some kids will, and adults will talk about grieving immediately, but to force someone who doesn't want to talk about it immediately will actually make it worse. And there's no time frame around grieving. It can go on. You never really get over it. You just learn to create the space around it, and so that's the kind of languaging that the child needed. They needed to feel safe. What has happened in the last 40 years is that the system of the biomedical model, this very medicalizing of grief, and making it like a clinical thing, because if you grieve longer than X amount of time, and it's something ridiculous like a few days, a couple of weeks, then there's something, you've got a disorder. You don't have a disorder if you're still sad and crying for your grandmother after 6 months, or after a year, or after 2 years. My dad died 20 years ago. I still get sad. Doesn't mean I have a mental disorder. It means I'm being a normal human and I'm going through my own process of grieving. And that's what we need to be telling our kids. But what we're not telling them, what they are seeing, and they're very perceptive. Kids are, and I talk about this in my book, even a 2-year-old is way more perceptive and can see what's going on than what they can express. Their understanding is more advanced than their ability to express what they understand. And so they are seeing that if they go talk to the counselor, they'll get potentially teased by the other kids or labeled and treated differently, and maybe even medicated because they say they don't want to eat. Then there's something wrong with them, and they get, they're depressed, give them an antidepressant, which makes them feel worse, and that creates a bunch of side effect behaviors that then get told it's part of their depression. It's not part of their depression. It's the medications messing their brain up and making them feel awful about how they physically feel, which is coming out in behavioral issues. So now something that was a normal grief response can become a mental issue, a mental illness. So we shouldn't talk about mental illness. We should talk about the fact that people are battling mentally for whatever reason, and we need to be able to not make them feel bad about it. So what we've done what's happened is that mental health was stigmatized. Then they did this big campaigns to try and destigmatize mental health, to make people talk about it more. And so they do these surveys at schools, and and what the research is actually showing is it's made it worse. That these surveys, the questions that they ask, the kind of trying to get kids to talk about it, makes them feel worse about themselves. It actually it confuses them, because they get told like messages like, for example, if a child's sad, you'll say, you it's interesting that there was a survey done where you can ask a child, oh, you feel depressed. Why do you feel depressed? Oh, I've got something wrong with my brain. Why have you got something wrong with your brain? Oh, I feel depressed. Can you see it's circular reasoning? They're confused. They've had a very confusing message. Gen X, Gen Alpha, which is our youngsters, have had this messaging that if you have any emotion that's not happy and, you know, all sunshine and roses, that there's something wrong with you. Meanwhile, unhappiness and sadness are part of being a human. Dealing with challenging situations as a child growing up is part of childhood. Obviously, abuse is not a part of childhood. It's that's unfortunate. That's on the extreme end. But at the same time, this whole attempt to destigmatize has made things worse. This attempt to medicalize and say, hey, if you pay attention to a physical injury, we must give mental illness the same kind of attention. It hasn't actually achieved that goal. It's made it worse. It's increased the stigma, and that's what the research shows. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when we introduced this model, not we, when the model was introduced, there was a lot of fight back from scientists like myself, but it became very dominant and is still dominant today. This thing that any of these signs and symptoms are symptoms of brain disease, and it's a symptom. You need more screening. We need to catch these kids quickly. We need to get them on the medication quickly. That's not the solution. If it was, there's a logical question that we have to ask ourselves. If it was, why is there such a crisis in mental health currently? Why is it that we have 4-year-olds dying by suicide, 8-year-olds dying by suicide? In a society where a child feels the need to kill themselves because it's so hard to live at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever age, there is something wrong with our society. Global surveys that have looked at mental health over the years saw a massive shift in the last few years of where children were the happy ones are now the sad ones. Adults appear happier than children. So we have a crisis, not of mental health, brain things going wrong. We have a crisis of management. We're not allowing our children to understand what it means to experience life, to have mind experiences, and that it's hard and it's okay to cry and it's okay to be a mess, and this is how we manage it, and that's a normal response to be sad. That they don't feel safe in that space to go to the social worker or the psychologist always. Sometimes there are some great ones that do make them feel safe, but the kind of system that's been set up, they don't feel safe. And that's what your kids recognize. They didn't feel safe. Who wants to be labeled if you say? Who wants to get a label that makes you different to the other kids? The last thing a kid wants to feel is different to another kid. They want to feel part of the group. It's part of one of the main reasons that children battle with mental health is when they are stigmatized, and that affects their relationships. So they want to be accepted. They don't need to be labeled. So if a child's showing up with those signals, that's why I outlined that whole process. Rather find the cause. And if you need the help from the therapist to help you deal with, if something big comes up and you're not sure how to deal with it as a parent, go to a therapist. Get them to help you. But you're still living with yourself 24/7. So is your child. Your child wakes up in the middle of the night. Your child's going to school and facing that bully on the playground. Your child's sitting in that math class and getting teased because they've got they're a new kid in the class or something like that. They've got to know how to manage their mind in that moment. They've got to know how to be resilient in themselves. They've got to know, I feel a bit sad now because I was teased. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with me. This is how I'm going to deal with it. That's what we've got to be teaching our kids, not letting them suppress it so that it explodes in behavioral problems that then get labeled and medicated, which makes the situation worse. And then they get teased even more. Vicious cycle.
Wow. Clearly, this is a resource that everybody needs, and your new book is currently on pre order. And if people pre order, they get some extra stuff with it. So tell everybody a little bit more about how they can pre order your book and what they'll find in the pages of this fantastic book that you've created.
Thank you so much. Well, the book is called, as you said, How to Help a Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. It's lots of images of Brainy walking you through the whole process. So, for example, you can see on this page, there's a whole lot of pictures. So all those 4 warning signals that I spoke about, the behaviors, the emotions, the bodily sensations, the perspective, they've each got pictures. So your children can, you've got the words, but there's pictures there for the children for you to help your child. You'll see the gray block over here. That's how you would say it to your child. And then the out of the gray block is explaining to the parents. So each concept, how to explain a thought, how to explain memories, how to explain emotions, how to explain a bad thing happening, a good thing, all that kind of thing is laid out. The second half of the book has examples about how to deal with identity issues, how to deal with trauma, how to deal with, and there's stories as well. There's tips. There's a million different ways that's exaggeration. There's lots of different practical things you can do in terms of the neurocycle. Kids love the word neurocycle. I can tell you even a 2-year-old loves that word. They love the brain. That's why I've created the little brainy figure. And I keep bumping this light, apologies. even the neurocycle, it's got images, so it's very easy to actually teach it to a child. We find that children learn the neurocycle almost quicker than the adult because they just go with the flow. It makes so much sense. As adults, we ask questions, why am I doing that? Whereas a child flows beautifully. So I often tell a parent, teach yourself this with this book as well. I've got the other book too, which is the adult version. The two together help a lot. So with the pre-order, and the book's available wherever books are sold, you get, you can pre-order the book, you can get access to the Brainy toy, and there's even a coloring book with Brainy and friends. So it's various different scenarios with blank, like angry, so you can color it in. So they can, there's a blank page where they can draw more pictures. So that's the first in a whole series. So the pre-order, you can get a huge discount off the toy and the book. And there's also a back to school free webinar that I'll be doing on the pre-order to help your child prepare for going back to school, which is a huge thing in kids' lives. They do love it, but there's a lot of anticipation that can make them feel very anxious, and how to deal with that. So that's some of the things.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure that people are going to want to keep up with you even outside of getting the new book. So let everybody know where you're at on social media, and you have your own show as well where you give a lot of wisdom.
Thank you. Yeah, my show is actually called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. So the same, how to help your child clean up your mental mess. So, and that's available on all podcast platforms. And then I've also my social media handles, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and webpage drleaf.com.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to give us all this wisdom on today's episode, Dr. Leaf.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for what you do and for asking brilliant questions.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show is complete. And we want you, listen, if you have kids and you want to lay a solid foundation of mental health, this book is a must-have. We have a link to it in the show notes of this episode. Get it, get the pre-order, because then you also get access to the goodies, including the seminar that Dr. Leaf is going to be doing to help you and your kids prepare for the new school year. We make ourselves a resource for you, so we hope that you take advantage of the information that we provided on today. That's all we got for this time, guys. It's been great. Till next time. Peace.